Few moments in history carry as much mystery, controversy, and impact as the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. Have you ever stopped to think about what Pontius Pilate really saw when he looked at that man? The biblical narrative gives us some clues, but what if there was a missing record? What if Pilate, pressured by his conscience and the unexplainable events he witnessed, wrote a letter to Emperor Tiberius detailing everything he saw? Imagine what such a document could contain. Detailed descriptions of Jesus, his words during the trial, the supernatural chaos that took over Jerusalem at the moment of his death, and perhaps even a regret that haunted Pilate for the rest of his life. History has a peculiar way of hiding its secrets. Some relics fade into the shadows of time, others are deliberately concealed by those who fear their impact. And then there are those that simply vanish, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Imagine for a moment a letter written by none other than Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, addressed to Emperor Tiberius. The content of such a document would be nothing short of explosive. After all, Pilate was not a mere observer of the events that shaped history. He was at the very center of one of the most controversial decisions humanity has ever witnessed. What could this letter reveal? Would it express doubts, fear, deep regret, or would it serve as a pragmatic report from a Roman official trying to justify his actions to an emperor who demanded results and order? What makes this supposed letter even more intriguing is the context in which it was written. Rome did not deal casually with figures like Jesus. For the Romans, rebels were dealt with swiftly and mercilessly. But Pilate was facing something different. This was not a warrior, not a violent agitator, nor a political leader seeking to seize the throne. He saw Jesus as an enigma, and if there was one thing Rome feared, it was what it could not fully comprehend. In his letter, Pilate might have tried to explain something even he struggled to grasp. Would he have described the impact Jesus had on the crowds? Would he have admitted that his presence was unsettling in a way that words could not fully define? Such a letter could be one of history's most valuable records, a piece that, if discovered, would change not only historians' perspectives, but also the way many people understand this pivotal moment in human history. And if this letter was truly written, what happened to it? Roman documents were meticulously archived, and many have survived the test of time, inscribed on scrolls and bronze tablets. However, inconvenient information often met a different fate. Books were burned, papyri destroyed, accounts silenced. There are historical records suggesting that documents about significant figures from that period were deliberately erased. If Pilate's letter was real, it could have been one of these cases, or perhaps it still lies hidden, stored in some undiscovered archive, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. The question remains, if this record came to light, how would it change our understanding of one of the most consequential events in human history? And so, we move on to an even more fascinating question. If Pilate truly wrote about Jesus, how did he describe him? Many assume his perspective was distant and bureaucratic, but what if, hidden in the words of a pressured governor, there was something that suggested he saw more than just a man? Something that hinted that before him stood someone who transcended any logical explanation. There are various accounts attempting to describe Jesus' appearance, but few would be as striking as one written by someone who saw him in person. If Pilate truly wrote a letter to Emperor Tiberius, it might contain details that challenge the stereotypes formed over centuries. The Roman governor, a man accustomed to dealing with criminals, nobles, and generals, found himself before someone who fit none of these categories. Jesus was not a violent revolutionary, nor a delusional mystic lost in fantasies. Pilate might have described him as a man with a striking presence, whose posture and gaze conveyed something extraordinary, an authority that did not come from a title, but from his very essence. According to some apocryphal texts and ancient Traditions. Jesus had fair skin, long golden brown hair that fell over his shoulders, and grayish eyes, deep like the ocean before a storm. His expression was not arrogant but serene, almost as if he could see beyond what was visible. Unlike Roman warriors who projected physical dominance, his strength seemed to come from something intangible, as if the very essence of truth was imprinted on his face. This description contrasts with many popular depictions, where Jesus is portrayed differently depending on cultural and historical influences. But imagine the impact on Pilate, a governor trained to assess and measure men with a calculating eye, when faced with someone whose presence defied all political and military logic. Pilate, by nature, was not easily impressed. His position demanded cold calculation, strategic thinking, and political survival skills. However, there are indications that he could not hide the discomfort he felt when interrogating Jesus. What unsettled him? Jesus' words, his demeanor, or the way his very silence spoke louder than any argument? If Pilate's description of Jesus truly included this sense of uniqueness, perhaps it would explain part of the dilemma he faced when trying to judge a man who, under Roman law, appeared guilty of nothing. This alleged letter from Pilate would not just describe Jesus' appearance, it would reveal something much deeper, the effect he had on those around him, an effect that could not be explained by mere words or titles. And if this account were real, it would lead us directly to the most critical moment of his story, his trial and crucifixion. Pilate found himself in a dilemma that would test both his position as governor and his conscience as a man. Jesus' case was not a typical trial. There was no concrete evidence against him, no act of insurrection, no proof of any threat to Rome. What existed, however, was a political storm brewing. The religious leaders accused him of blasphemy, and the crowd demanded his condemnation. When Pilate questioned him, he noticed something unusual. Jesus did not defend himself like any other accused man. He did not beg for his life, did not argue in desperation, and did not try to convince the governor of his innocence. His posture was that of someone who already knew what was coming, and in a way, that unsettled Pilate, seeing no legal basis. For sentencing him, Pilate attempted a diplomatic solution. He followed the Jewish Passover tradition of releasing a prisoner to the people. He presented Jesus and Barabbas, a well-known criminal. Logically, the choice should have been obvious. But the crowd's cries shocked him. They wanted Barabbas freed and demanded Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate hesitated. He questioned again, "What evil has he done?" But the shouts only grew louder. "Crucify him!" Now cornered, the Roman governor publicly washed his hands, a symbolic gesture meant to absolve himself of guilt. Yet deep down, he knew this decision would not be erased so easily. Crucifixion was the most brutal punishment in the Roman Empire, reserved for the worst criminals. The condemned would first be scourged with a flagrum, a whip embedded with metal and bone shards which tore into the flesh, exposing muscle and bone. Afterward, they were forced to carry their own cross to the execution site. Jesus endured all of this. His sentence, nailed to the cross, bore the ironic inscription, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," a title the Jewish leaders rejected, but which Pilate, perhaps in an act of defiance, refused to remove. And so, on Golgotha, Jesus was crucified. Beside him, two criminals, each reacting differently to his presence. While one mocked him, the other acknowledged his innocence. Pilate, in his letter, might have detailed the moment Jesus spoke his final words, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." How could a man unjustly condemned offer forgiveness in the midst of such agony? This was a question Pilate likely carried for the rest of his life. And just as the world thought everything ended there, something beyond human comprehension began to unfold. The crucifixion of Jesus was already a significant event on its own, But what followed made many doubt that this was just another Roman execution. If Pilate truly wrote to Emperor Tiberius, his letter might have described something entirely outside the realm of normalcy. The midday sky suddenly darkened. This wasn't a passing cloud or an expected natural phenomenon. It was as if creation itself was reacting against what was happening. The atmosphere grew dense, heavy, as if something far greater was about to unfold. The soldiers, accustomed to executions, felt an unexplainable chill. Something was wrong. Then came the earthquake. Jerusalem, a city familiar with occasional tremors, had never experienced anything of this magnitude. The ground shook, cracks appeared, rocks split apart. Even the temple, the very heart of Jewish worship, was affected. The veil that separated the Holy of Holies, a sacred place where only the high priest could enter, tore from top to bottom, as if some invisible force had declared that something definitive had just occurred. What did this mean? For the religious leaders, it was a terrifying omen. For the followers of Jesus, it was a sign that his sacrifice had been accepted and that the separation between God and man had been broken. But the most disturbing event was yet to come. Witnesses reported that amid the chaos, something unexplainable happened. The dead were seen walking among the living. Tombs broke open, and people who had long been deceased were recognized by their families. This detail, as supernatural as it seems, is recorded in the Gospels themselves. If Pilate mentioned this in his letter, he must have done so with the bewilderment of a rational man trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. For a Roman who believed in omens and divine warnings, these signs could not be ignored. The governor, who initially saw Jesus as just another political problem to be solved, now faced something far beyond his understanding. The events of that day were not merely a spectacle of suffering. They carried a significance that even the most skeptical could not deny. And if all of this truly happened, how did Pilate deal with the weight of his decision in the days that followed? Did he try to forget, or did he spend the rest of his life haunted by that moment? After the crucifixion, Pilate's life was never the same. The Roman governor, accustomed to handling rebels, political schemes, and strategic decisions, found himself facing a reality beyond his control. If the supposed letter to Emperor Tiberius truly existed, it might reveal an unease in Pilate, not just from political pressure, but from the haunting realization that he had sentenced to death a man who was beyond his understanding. How could he explain the supernatural events that took place that day? How could he return to normal life after witnessing a condemned man, beaten and crucified, offering forgiveness to his executioners with a gaze of compassion that few could bear? In the corridors of his mind, Pilate may have replayed the trial over and over. He had tried to avoid sentencing Jesus. He had publicly washed his hands, a symbolic gesture to distance himself from guilt. But was that truly enough to ease his conscience? The problem with knowing the truth is that it refuses to be ignored. Pilate knew that Jesus was not guilty of any crime. He had seen in his eyes a peace that defied all logic. And yet, he gave into political pressure, handing him over to be crucified. This burden, no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, would not disappear with mere justifications. Historians suggest that Pilate's fate after the crucifixion was marked by uncertainty and disgrace. Some accounts claim he was removed from office, exiled, and ultimately took his own life, tormented by guilt. Others say he simply vanished from history, as if Rome had decided to erase him from its records. If this letter was real, it might have been his attempt to make sense of what had happened. Perhaps he recognized too late that Jesus was not just another political prisoner, but someone whose impact transcended empires and rulers. And this leads us to an even greater question. What tangible evidence do we have of Pilate's presence in Judea? History may have hidden some answers, But archaeology has brought to light a significant clue. The Pilate stone discovered in Caesarea Maritima confirmed that he was indeed a historical figure who governed Judea during the time described in the Gospels. But what else remains hidden, waiting to be uncovered? Could there be a lost document that reveals once and for all what Pilate truly thought about Jesus? History often buries its secrets, but archaeology has a way of unearthing them. For centuries, many questioned the existence of Pontius Pilate, suggesting he was merely a literary figure created to fit the gospel narratives. However, in 1961, a discovery changed everything. During excavations in Caesarea Maritima, archaeologists uncovered a stone with an inscription in Latin directly referring to Pilate as prefect of Judea. This find, now known as the Pilate stone, provided tangible proof that he was not a theological invention, but a real historical figure. The significance of this discovery goes beyond merely confirming Pilate's existence. It strengthens the historical credibility of the gospel accounts and opens the door to the possibility that other documents about Jesus may still exist. If the inscription of a governor survived the test of time, what other traces of his administration might still be buried beneath the ruins of the Roman Empire? The idea that a lost letter or official record of Jesus' trial could someday emerge is not as far-fetched as it seems. Beyond the Pilate stone, other archaeological discoveries reinforce the biblical narrative. The ossuary of Caiaphas, the high priest involved in Jesus' trial, was found in Jerusalem. Ruins of the Antonia fortress, where Jesus was likely taken for trial, have also been identified. These physical artifacts demonstrate that the events described in the Gospels did not take place in a mythological vacuum, but within a well-defined historical context. With each new discovery, the past becomes more tangible, and the line between faith and history grows thinner. If archaeology has already uncovered so many hidden truths, could an even greater revelation still await? A Roman document about Jesus' trial, a mention in imperial archives, or even a personal letter from Pilate to Emperor Tiberius? What would happen if such a discovery were made? How would history and faith reconcile with such a revelation? Perhaps, just as the supernatural events surrounding the crucifixion unfolded at the right time, the truth about Pilate's thoughts is also waiting for its moment to be revealed. If this lost letter were to be found, how would the world react? Pontius Pilate was not just another Roman official. He was an eyewitness to one of the most defining moments in human history. Whether through regret or silence, the weight of his decision teaches us profound lessons about truth and the cost of the choices we make. So now the reflection turns to you. If you had been in Pilate's position, how would you have responded? Would you have had the courage to stand for the truth, or would you have given in to pressure? The decisions we make often seem small, but they can change our lives forever. If this content resonated with you, don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue exploring these incredible mysteries. There is still so much more to uncover.